as David said, his brother David said, it won't play on the radio. There's not a hit on here. He sounded like an A&R man for Columbia Records. I don't hear the hit. And so Bob said, so what can we do about it? David said, well, let me call Kevin and Paul Martinson, the engineer, and we'll see what we can line up. So we haggled over musicians and got the band together, and we were only planning on doing one song or two songs at the most, but it came out so well in the roughs and the first takes that we kept going and got through 5 songs within 2 sessions in a very, very short period of time, because there was never any more than one take after Idiot went. It was one take, and that was it. Bob overdubbed on virtually every song, however.
Although the same songs were recorded, many have noticed the subtle changes in Dylan's approach during the Minnesota sessions.
When artists are allowed to ruminate on their work, whether they be painters or musicians or great composers, they'll often change something. They'll put a horn section in here or this or that, and he felt that both lyrically and musically, lyrically, most of the critics, and you'll find that Clinton Heylin and Howard Sounds agree that Dylan softened the lyric for Minneapolis. He was less brutal on the character, who is obviously Sarah in Idiot Wind, and brought himself further into the picture, so it wasn't quite so cruel. But the treatment was tougher. He jumps right into the thing like a shotgun, like a whip on a pony. Someone's got it in for me. I mean, and this comes out of absolute thin air. He's mad, and he's mad all the way through the song, and he gets madder. And he was going for something completely different, and he got something entirely and completely different than he got in New York. We took Tangled Up in Blue in one session, and it was the most, it brought tears to my eyes during the session. 5 Minnesota farm boys, prairie lads, if you will, who'd grown up listening to this fellow on headphones in a room, playing live on what we know, all of us, is going to be a classic song. And dancing out at the end with that wonderful, beautiful, rhapsodic harmonica solo at the end of Tangled Up in Blue.
The finished album, Blood on the Tracks, was hailed as Dylan's strongest of the decade and is still regularly counted among the best records ever made.
Blood on the Tracks is the work of a mature artist. Remarkable as the work that he produced in his 20s had been, for a man who was able to bring all of that to Blood on the Tracks and the maturity of viewpoint that he hadn't had at that, to an album, and make it work as a totality, just as John Wesley Harding is a totality. Blood on the Tracks is a totality. It's as close to a perfect album as you could reasonably put together with that material. It's the greatest collection of lyrical love poems of the 20th century, bar none. Not sure anybody's really that close. It's an extraordinary combination of aspects of Dylan's genius. Nobody else could have produced a work like that, and many have tried.
I listened to the record once. Nothing, I don't remember thinking anything, whatever. I put it away, and the next time I listened to the record was when we did the Blood on the Tracks concert in Minneapolis last year, 2 years ago. When I suggested to Kevin that maybe I could sing one of the songs, he said, well, pick one out, So I had to listen to the album, pick one out. And my whole outlook and opinion of the whole thing changed 180 degrees. I think it's a fantastic album. The songs are great. I was trying to see if I could hear which tunes were the ones that we were on, the New York guys. Couldn't tell at all, really. I wouldn't swear to any of them. I said, no, that's definitely not us.
It was a return to form, and it was absolutely because he changed his mind. Bob Dylan made all the correct commercial and artistic decisions on that record himself. Everyone who speculates, Phil Ramone, myself, anyone you speak to about it has a different theory, and everyone likes certain pieces of that New York session just as well or better than some of the things that we did in Minneapolis. But the whole of the piece that he got by redoing half the album in Minneapolis, I think is tightest, most in tune, most commercial, most professionally completed masterpiece. With the exception, of course, of Blonde on Blonde, which was flawless because it had magic.
It was a strange thing, the whole album, I think. And then to go, you know, a third of the way across the country or more, and then get other guys who were not really professional studio guys, but maybe that's what it needed. You know, it needed to feel a little less professional. Although I still contend that. I don't think we sounded all that professional. It was pretty much, and I couldn't tell who was playing which tracks, like I said. Strange, it was a strange era, a strange little segment of our recording lives.
After the release of the album and a brief visit to the south of France, Dylan returned to Greenwich Village in June 1975. While haunting the familiar clubs and bars, he fortuitously met Jacques Levy, a theatre director and playwright who had previously been introduced to Dylan the year before.
I wrote for Roger McGuinn and the Byrds before I wrote for Bob, and I believe I met Bob sometime in California. I knew who he was, of course. He had no idea who I was. But it turned out, I found out later, that he did know who I was because he'd gone to see a couple of things I directed. The second time we met was complete serendipity. I lived a block up. I walked out of my house on LaGuardia Place. Bob walked past me by himself on his way somewhere. I didn't know where he was going. And I said, Bob. And he turned and looked at me. He said, oh, hi. And we chatted. I said, where are you going? And it turned out he was going to a place that I often hung out. It's a little bar on Bleecker Street called The Other End, which is the downstairs part of the Bitter End, which is more famous. And so I went with him, and we went and had a drink together. And that's how the two of us sort of connected.
Dylan proposed that Levy work with him on the lyrics to a new album, having been specifically intrigued by the emphasis on narrative in Levy's previous work.
He had heard the lyrics that I'd written for McGuinn. He'd heard Chestnut Mare, which is the most famous of the songs I've written with McGuinn. And I think he liked the idea that I could tell a story, that there was a story in that song. Bob is not really that good at telling stories, you know. He doesn't go from A to B to C to D. And he's got a lot of good stuff in his songs, but they don't usually add up to a story. Once in a while he does. And I think he liked that.
After composing their first song, Isis, that night, they moved to Dylan's house in the Hamptons to work on the album. Over the next month, they collaborated closely, although the emphasis was on atmosphere and theme rather than on specific meaning.
The personal references in the songs, or what the songs were about, we didn't discuss. We didn't get into that. We didn't get into, what do you mean by this, what's all this kind of stuff. You know, like, I can't tell you how many times I have been asked the significance of the 5th day of May. You know, and I just fended off. I don't know the significance, and I don't care what it is. And I tell people, make up your own significance.
Levy's contribution stands today.